Yes, David, how are you? I've been doing some research on politics lately about George Bush.
Uh, which one?
George Bush, who was president.
Yeah. There were two George Bushes. George H.W. Bush, who was president from 1988 to 1992, and George W. Bush, his son, who was president after then.
Anyway, I
Obama.
was watching a show on Amazon Prime called Declassified, and there was these three mercenaries who were held political prisoners by the Taliban. And George Bush was talking on TV about war and all that. Like, all he ever spoke about was just war.
He was not just war, but certainly they did. He certainly expanded. Let's put it this way: he expanded America's military presence around the world. Most presidents do. I think one of the flaws of the Obama presidency was his bombing of the Middle East. One of the flaws of the Clinton presidency was his bombing and his land invasions of various, mostly the Middle East. Now, whether they were more than George W. Bush or not, I'm not sure. But certainly Bush had a fairly bad reputation around the world for his more what they call hawk-like approach to foreign policy. The hawks are in favor of, or generally in favor of, using military solutions to solve problems. The doves are generally in favor of diplomacy. Now, that's doves will go to war and hawks will look at diplomatic solutions. But the tendency of both parties, with a lot of crossover and a lot of moving between, is one looks to the military first, the other one looks to diplomacy first. And Bush certainly fell on the military side of things. I think that's fair to say, yes.
But so Donald Trump, he was he taking the troops out of Iraq or something? He wanted to stop it.
He announced that troops would be removed from Afghanistan. This had been announced 2 years before. Obama had announced that. Bush had announced that. Now, Afghanistan was America's longest foreign war. We tend to forget this. It was one that was kind of kept off the television.
See, I was in Declassified. There's been a lot of war crimes by the Americans.
Yes.
And Guantanamo Bay, George Bush breached the Geneva Convention.
Yes.
That's not to say all militaries are breaching the Geneva Convention. There was some detainees were innocent. Now, how come detainees never went through a trial before proven guilty?
This is a can of worms that I will try and unpack in a couple of minutes. We probably need 3 hours. There's one. Don't you love those long silences? Hello, listeners. I think you had this very aggressive approach by the US to make sure that their perceived enemies, and sometimes actual enemies, let's be fair, weren't given due process because certain factions in the US military and government didn't think they deserved it, that they were enemies of the state, and as a result, you lose even your most basic rights. Now, even prisoners have some rights. You have the right to food, you have the right to water, you have the right to not be tortured, you have the right to contact with sorry, let me start that again. You have the right to contact with family members. Now, all of these can be constrained and changed in a way. If you're in jail, you can't expect to be given, you can't expect to be allowed to make phone calls 24 hours a day to your family, for example. So they might say, okay, once a week on Sundays, it's visiting day and your family can come in, they can stay for an hour and that's it. Sometimes it's a bit more than that. It depends on the prisoner. It depends on the policy of the jail. Now, in Guantanamo Bay, they were being tortured. This is absolutely against the Geneva Convention. Most countries, it's like intelligence agencies. Every country would say this is wrong and stupid, and every country has one. Torture is the same. Most countries torture in some kinds of ways. There's physical torture and there's mental torture.
The Japanese, I think it was Vietnam, they were using psychological torture.
Oh, psychological torture has been around since forever.
That's the worst, isn't it?
It can be, yeah, because it's harder to prove, because its effects can be very, very long lasting, and they've found that torture actually doesn't achieve anything. People will tell you what they want to hear. People will tell you what you want to hear. People will tell you what you want to hear just to stop the torture. Americans were very famous for waterboarding, tipping people upside down and just rushing gallons of water up their nose and their mouths. Terrible torture, awful. And the usual defense is that everybody does it. But as I'm sure your grandmother has said, if your friends jumped off the bridge, would you? It doesn't make it right.
See, Gary Powell, the YouTube YouTube pilot, he was held prisoner of war for 15 years. And how come the American government never came to rescue him?
I think partly they didn't know where he was. They knew he was captured, but there's no point in sending in troops to every prison in the USSR. And the USSR is a big place.
Oh, yeah.
And very easy to hide a prisoner. I think also the risk of nuclear war, sending in a small group of troops, breaches all kinds of international conventions and would have led to nuclear war. So getting him out in the way they did, diplomacy, though it was slow and awful for him. It wasn't a pleasant experience. He would have it would have been awful, but it was better than the alternative of wiping out most of the world through nuclear war. Even the Hawks. And sure, the nice thing is, had they found out, send in a group of Navy SEALs, who are the elite American troops, and get him out. But the consequences would have been catastrophic. And in all dealings, but in international relations, you've got to weigh the reward against the risk. And most foreign affairs tend to be more conservative, tend to be more measured, tend to be more considered, because one tiny mistake can set off a whole chain reaction of things that can lead to catastrophic results.
Yeah, I mean, it's called Declassified. It's on Amazon Prime.
I'll give it a watch.
Yeah, and it's talking about some spies who committed espionage against the United States as well, who are working in the CIA. Give it a watch because it's quite, interesting. It's all declassified information. But on WikiLeaks, actually, you've heard of WikiLeaks?
Yes.
There's a video of American helicopters. They were just they were bombing civilians.
Yep. Again, the idea is that either one, they've made a genuine mistake and thought that the town they were bombing was a military installation, but it's also the notion of terror. If you bomb civilians, and I am not at all condoning this, but the argument behind it is that the civilian population turns against the government that's allowed this to happen, that their own government, I mean. It's a risky situation. Probably the most famous in Australia is the Blitzkrieg, the Battle of Britain, where the Germans were bombing residential areas of London and other cities, as well as the factories, because part of it was to destroy the morale. Often, though, it can go quite the other way. Bombing non-combatants and people who aren't directly working, it's one thing to bomb a munitions factory and there'll be civilians in there, but that could be argued as the cost of war. It's another thing to bomb residential houses.
The Americans have done that.
Oh, yeah.
They pissed a lot of civilians off in Iraq and all that.
Iraq and Iran and all of the Middle East are, what's the word? It's a fool's mission. It's all over oil. They'll tell you it's all over other things, etc. The whole Israel thing, the whole support of Israel from America, and I'm not here to slam down Israel as a concept, but a lot of it is because of evangelical Christians in the American establishment who believe that Israel is key to God's plan on the earth. If those people were removed, I think we'd have a totally different situation in Israel. And again, this isn't to say that Israel shouldn't exist as a country, and I know that there are people who think that, and there are arguments. I think that there are solutions in which you can have the country of Israel, the state of Israel, the state of Palestine, and everybody's more or less happy. But yeah, I'll leave it.
It was John Howard even quoted Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, but it wasn't proven. But the Russians were in Iraq before the Americans took over too.
Oh, the British were there again, if they didn't have oil, there'd be no interest. Nobody's storming into Bulgaria or Argentina. Actually, no, Argentina's the wrong. Nobody's storming into places that don't have easily accessible and abundant oil. I'll put it that way.
No, it's a good point. But see, the US government, Australian government, they're saying something completely different to the truth.
That's governments, and that's governments of all stripes. When you get into foreign affairs, you tend to get less party politics because it takes, it takes 20 years to negotiate a trade deal.
Oh my
on average. God. Yeah. Because these things are complex, they're complicated, and everything you trade has consequences for employment, for income, for GDP, for the economy. You have to be careful that you can supply whatever you're trading for the length of the trade deal. You have to be confident that the other side can supply it. Technologies change. 20 years ago, we didn't really have the internet in the way we have it today. Just as an example, some things have become more efficient to manufacture. Some things have become less efficient to manufacture because of access to resources.
I like your arms. No, look, I think you're right. Like WikiLeaks has leaked, like Julian Assange leaked out so much government information on that website. You can read it up, man.
Oh yeah, no, I find WikiLeaks, it's an excellent resource for stuff, particularly the stuff they don't want you to. But it's very hard to navigate. You've got to know what you're looking for, which I think might be partly deliberate. I think it's not a newspaper; it's a news source.
Now, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, France, Britain, all went to Iraq. Iraq, is that correct?
Iraq, I think, is
Iraq. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
But why, if it's an American war, that they need another 5 other countries just to go? I don't get that.
The Coalition of the Willing, it was called. Partly it was to legitimize America's going in. The argument was after the September 11, 2001 bombings, attack on the World Trade Center, not bombings, that this was a strike against the West. Because the World Trade Center, of course, was a world trade center. There were lots of companies who would, trade with each other and do business with each other within the buildings. The thing is that the terrorists on the planes were actually Saudi. They were from Saudi Arabia.
Oh, God.
But George, now Saudi Arabia is a very strong ally of the United States. I don't think there's been any evidence to suggest that they were working in concert with any government. I'm not even sure that they were working in concert with any terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda. Certainly Al-Qaeda approved. I think that's fair to say.
It's called ISIS now.
Yeah. And certainly they approved. But George Bush used it as an opportunity to go in and see if they could secure the oil resources of Iraq. And Saddam Hussein was painted as a massive villain. He probably was a villain, let's be fair, but he certainly had nothing to do with, or had very little to do with we'll call it the 9/11 attack. They, of course, took him out, and America has for a long time had a non-assassination policy, which they bend and break every now and then. Fidel Castro... come on.
Yeah, do you think all militaries are going to break the rules?
Oh, all militaries do. One of the things, too, is that if you've never had a gun shot at you, if you've never been in a situation, it's very hard to know what the experience is like. This isn't to justify any war crimes, of course, but people behave in all kinds of different ways under high stress. Situations. Again, and so people will do things. Having said that, militaries will quietly order things to happen that perhaps that they shouldn't. Governments will want things done to resolve difficult issues quickly. It's basically people are awful.
Well, they all are.
Power's a corrupting influence.
Australians, the British have done it, but they never talk about it as well. But at some stage they've all been guilty.
Oh, for sure. If you ask any Irish person about British government, particularly those of a certain age, they will respond very differently to interested Australians, for example, and with good reason. Do you need to take that?
No. No,
it's George Bush ringing us. I want to give my side of the story.
Hello. It's like Bill Clinton when he denied sexual allegations with Monica Lewinsky. Do you think he was lying?
Oh, he absolutely was. Now, as a few people have pointed out, of course he was going to. As it was nobody's business except hers and his. There's a power issue here. Like, I'm not saying that he did the right thing at all, but it basically destroyed Monica Lewinsky's career, and I think damaged her profoundly as a person. And she shouldn't have been. It was an awful thing to have happened.
When was this? Was this in the 90s?
Yeah, this is 94 or 96 or something.
I was like a little baby, mate. I wouldn't remember. I just saw a clip on YouTube the other week about it.
Yeah, I'm just looking up now what year it was. 96? Here we go. Wikipedia says it's
Wikipedia.
1897 to 2015. No.
What are you doing?
November.
Wikipedia as a scholar.
No, I've got a news thing here, and the scandal broke in 1998, so late 90s, and what happened to her was unconscionable. I think Bill Clinton was in an understandable position to try and lie his way out of it. There were plenty. I'm not justifying it, but I think a lot of people in the same position would have done exactly the same thing. But yeah, I don't think I thought it was terrible that it was her who, at her age, she should have been heading up one of the Biden departments at this stage, or maybe working in corporates or what have you, and doing very well for herself. And she's clearly a fairly remarkable person, because I think she's done okay for herself. But yeah, she was taken out of consideration for a lot of this stuff, just because the scandal was so damaging to her. And of course all it did was give that lunatic wing of the Republican Party airtime distract Clinton from other things as president, and destroyed the career of a very capable and smart woman.
Was Bill Clinton smoking a lot of marijuana?
Oh no. Yeah. Maybe that's the way he should have gone. The attitude towards drugs in the US is, he admitted famously to being at a party where a marijuana joint was passed around, but that he didn't inhale. George W. Bush had a cocaine habit.
Oh my God.
As a young guy. Now, it's one thing. In Australia, we used to have a better attitude towards this stuff, in that if you did it at 19 and it didn't hurt anybody, it doesn't matter. John Curtin and Bob Hawke both famously gave up alcohol because it was damaging to their performance. And if they wanted to be prime ministers, they had to stop drinking, which both men did. But that's because their habit was destructive and got in the way of the greatness both men were capable of. I think in America, though, at 16 you have a puff of a joint once that can destroy your political career, which is a bit harsh, because I've never touched any of this stuff myself, but there's not much harm in dabbling, I guess. But yeah, this can destroy your career in ways. There's stuff, of course, that you do at 16, 17 that can have long-term implications, because it shows to your character and it shows to your attitude. In Australia, the cabinet minister who has been accused of rape, for example, I think that is, and in the States, Brett Kavanaugh, with his awful approaches to women, although a few leftist journalists have said he's done his very best to become a better person. And at that point, do you lose? I mean, my view is that there are some things that just disqualify you for a job, even if you become a better person. But there are others who'd say, look, yes, he did it at 19, 20 and he was terrible, but at 55 or whatever age he is now, he is actually a genuinely better person. I guess I'm glad I don't have to decide on such stuff. But yeah, there's some stuff you do at 16, 17, 18 that speaks to your character. There's other stuff you do that just speaks to being an idiotic 16, 17, 18-year-old.
Look,
which we all were.
Yeah, look, I've done stupid stuff in my teenage life, you know. But no, it just goes to show.
I missed church one Sunday. You know, don't tell anyone.
It just goes to show that there's a lot of lying and corruption in the US politics, David.
There's a lot of lying and corruption in a lot of countries.
Even Australia too.
Even Australia. There's a clean out coming, I think. I don't know that I agree with everything Joe Biden's doing, but I certainly think that he's brought back He's brought back a dignity to the office that we haven't seen for quite some years.
8 years or so, is it?
8 years, yeah. The president, any state leader should have dignity, smarts, wisdom. Now, they don't have to have it themselves, but of course, you surround yourself with great people. You know, you can't be an expert on everything that a world leader has to know about and has to make decisions on, but you can surround yourself with people who can advise you on what the right decision is. And of course, people are human. There are all kinds of vested interests that come into play. But Joe Biden can go overseas and nobody's worried that he's going to make a terrible blunder or gaffe, which you couldn't really say about the last guy. It was like when... Go ahead.
Donald Trump, I've see he was shaking Kanye West's hand. Apparently, Kanye West was supporting him. I had a meditation teacher, African American. He saw Donald Trump in a different way as well.
Yeah,
there are some African Americans that like him.
Yeah, I think one of the big mistakes that we make is that we assume all people who are somewhat different to us all have the same attitude. Now, 91% of African Americans vote Democrat, and that means 9% are Republican or not affiliated. Now, again, the complex history of the states is that, in fact, a lot of African Americans till about 1980 were Republican. Lincoln was a Republican. He freed the slaves. And Southern Republicans and Southern Democrats were totally different things. Reagan brings in the Southern Republicans and using the economy as his linchpin changes the attitude. And as a result, people like Bill Clinton are able to use African American votes in the South. And there's a semi-joke that Clinton was the first black president. And of course, Obama, I think, might count there as well. Obviously, Obama was the first black president, but Clinton's attitudes towards African Americans was as if he was one of them, and that helped.
Obama was born in Hawaii.
Yes.
My question to you, Dave: you have to be a U.S. citizen to be president, but Obama was born in Hawaii. How come he became president?
Hawaii is a state of America.
Gotcha.
It was the 50th state, 49th or 50th. In 1948, Alaska, and 1954, Hawaii becomes a full state. John McCain was born in Puerto Rico, which isn't a state. Having said that, he was born on a military base, and so both sides of politics said, yeah, we will let this slide, because nobody doubted John McCain's commitment to America and that he'd lived his life in America.
What party is Donald Trump?
Republican.
What party's John McCain? Republican.
He was Republican too.
Who's going to be the next Republican to run for president?
They say Trump.
Again?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christ.
You're allowed 2 terms, and he's had 1.
I thought you had to have, the way it was going to work is you'd have 2 terms as the president, but then after that, they replace you. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. You do your 2 terms, and then you go off into the sunset.
He technically had, did he have 2 terms, or was it just 1 as president?
He only had 1 term. He lost the 2020 election.
So if he had won the 2020 election...
That'd be 2nd term.
And just say he won the 2024 election, he'd be replaced, would he? Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. They'd have to bring in a new... And that's the Constitution. The convention was that you only did 2 terms. Washington only did 2 terms. And so nearly every president stepped down except for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who did a 3rd term and died in office in his 3rd term. Most other presidents until Eisenhower stepped down voluntarily after 2 terms. And let's be fair, 8 years is a long time with all the pressures of running one of the most powerful countries of the world, and then the most powerful country in the world. I think Eisenhower was the first one who had to stand down because they amended the Constitution to limit it to 2 terms. And in all honesty, I'm in favour of term limitations because even good presidents can turn bad.
Well, in Australia, we don't have that. You can be a prime minister as long as you want, but they do replace them quite frequently.
Yes. Let's see, our longest prime minister was Robert Menzies, who I think did 13 years.
What about John Howard? He was in for a while.
He's the second longest. He did 11 years. Then who is it? Bob Hawke.
Yeah.
Then I think Malcolm Fraser. Then who? It's probably Joe Lyons. Stanley Bruce. Yeah. In fact, the last 10 or 15 years have been a bit anomalous in Australia in that we tend to keep our prime ministers in for a good 2 terms or so.
Julia Gillard was Kevin Rudd got replaced by Julia Gillard. Then they replaced Julia Gillard by Kevin Rudd.
Yep.
Then Tony Abbott came in. He got replaced by Turnbull, and now Scott Morrison's been there since.
Yep. It looks like Scott Morrison will go to the next election because he changed the rules to make it harder to replace him. Now, to be fair, I think both major parties were in chaos, but they'd also picked people who couldn't manage that chaos for whatever reason. So yeah, both the leader of the Labor Party and the leader of the Liberal Party, there are stricter rules to change them. Now, usually this is good. You don't want to be continually undermined by your colleagues and, focusing on politics when you should be focusing on policy. But there's a danger in making it too hard to change, in that when the person in charge is no longer fit for office for whatever reason, you should be able to remove them quickly. And of course, these things will sort out. They'll work out a better balance, that you can't just dump someone. Kevin Rudd brought in the rules when he came back in because he'd been at 68 and 72 and 83% approval ratings, and he was down to 58, and they panicked. As John Howard said at the time, I'd have loved 58. He said, we'd have loved me to have 58%. He bubbled around 52, 54, 50. I think his biggest was 65. And then, he bubbled around the 50, just enough to keep winning. And John Howard saw that hard decisions had to be made. Now, we don't have to agree with those decisions, but he knew that to make the decisions that he had to make, and I didn't agree with a lot of those decisions, to be fair, he had to lose popularity to bring them through. And it becomes interesting in how various people act.
Exactly. Yeah, look, it's a great show with you today, David. I'll let you go. We'll have to wrap it up. I was just about to wrap it up. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Did that go to you?
Yeah.
Oops. Thanks. It's always a pleasure, Steve. Always.
Love talking politics with you in Houston as well.
Oh, good.
You get a chance. Watch Declassified if you can.
I will.
And let me know what you think.
I look forward to it. And thanks again for having me, Steve. And we'll see you next month.
Next.